In this video, we will discuss the indirect statement in Latin. The main goal of this video is to help you to become familiar with the concept of the indirect statement. The lesson will be continued in a second video, which will focus more on all of the details of the indirect statement. Gaius Mucius Scaevola was an early Roman hero who, when he was captured by the enemy, displayed his strength and fortitude by placing his right hand, his dominant hand, into a fire. And as he did so, he told the enemy king that the physical body means nothing to a man who has his eyes set on great glory. So, Scaevola manum in ignem ponet. Scaevola places his hand into the fire. Okay, and that sentence structure is easy enough. Subject, object, and verb. I am now going to show you a related sentence. I want you to watch out for how this new sentence is different from the first one. Milites vident, Scaevolam manum in ignem ponere. What do you notice has changed? Okay, now keep that in mind while we look at one more example pair. Scaevola fortis est. Scaevola is brave. Again, a familiar enough sentence construction. Subject, verb, and predicate. Here is another related sentence, and see if you can point out the differences. Milites credunt, Scaevolam fortem esse. What do you notice is different here? Let's pick apart some of the differences between the sentences in this second pair. Scaevola is the nominative subject, fortis is the nominative predicate, and est is the main verb. Watch what changes when we move to the green sentence below. We add the words milites credunt. Now, credunt is the main verb, and milites is the subject. But we've kept the words Scaevola and brave and is. We've moved Scaevola from the nominative case to the accusative case. We've moved fortis from the nominative case also to the accusative case. And we've moved est from a finite verb to an infinitive. Notice that in the first sentence, the idea is Scaevola is brave. But in the second sentence, we've shifted our focus. Milites credunt is the focus of the sentence. The soldiers believe. And then Scaevolam fortem esse becomes the thing that they believe, that Scaevola is brave. Okay, so let's work with translating these examples that we've seen so far. Here's the first one. Milites vident, Scaevolam manum in ignem ponere. Vident is our main verb. Milites is the nominative subject. Ponere is an infinitive. Scaevolam is in the accusative case. Manum is also in the accusative case. And we have a prepositional phrase in ignem, into the fire. So we might translate this very literally. The soldiers see Scaevola, ponere, to put his hand into the fire. So what's going on here? The main idea of the sentence is that the soldiers see. And then everything that comes after that is the thing that the soldiers see, that Scaevola puts his hand in the fire. And English has a specific way that it expresses this particular idea. Here we go. The soldiers see that Scaevola puts his hand into the fire. I want you to notice a couple of things here. First of all, we use this conjunction, that, to join together the idea of the soldiers seeing and Scaevola putting his hand in the fire. I also want you to notice that we've translated now the infinitive, ponere, as a finite verb, puts. So, whereas Latin expresses this idea with an accusative and infinitive, English expresses this idea using the conjunction that plus a finite verb. Let's look at the other example. Milites credunt, Scaevolam fortem esse. Our main verb is credunt, milites is the subject, Scaevolam is accusative, and so is fortem, and esse is the infinitive. So we might translate this literally. The soldiers believe, milites credunt, Scaevola to be brave. But again, think about what the sentence is trying to express. The soldiers have a belief, and this belief is that Scaevola is brave. And so English has a specific way that it wants to construe this. Again, using the word that plus a finite verb. The soldiers believe that Scaevola is brave. Okay, let's consolidate some of our knowledge about the indirect statement. The indirect statement is a construction that expresses an action or an idea through a specific person's point of view. So, in our example, the soldiers believe that Scaevola is brave. We're looking at Scaevola's bravery through the point of view of the soldiers. And a helpful thing to think about is that in translation, the helper word in English that we want to use is that. So in our example, we had the soldiers believe that Scaevola is brave. Now, there are three main elements in Latin that make up an indirect statement. The first is what I call a head verb. This is a verb of, generally speaking, thinking, saying, knowing, or perceiving. Remember that we need to express an idea or action through a person's point of view. So this introductory verb will need to be a verb of either mental or physical perception. Here are some verbs that could potentially introduce an indirect statement. Dico, say, clamo, shout, nuntio, announce, puto, think, credo, believe, spero, hope, promitto, promise, intelligo, understand, audio, hear, video, see, scio, know, and cognosco, learn. This is by no means a definitive list, but these 12 verbs, and verbs with similar meanings, will often introduce an indirect statement. So, that's the head verb. We also have an accusative subject inside the indirect statement, and we'll have an infinitive verb inside the indirect statement. So, let's look at one of those examples. Credunt, believe, is a verb of the head. It's a verb of mental perception. So that's 1, the head verb. Our accusative subject is Scaevolam, number 2. And our infinitive verb is esse, number 3. Now, I will briefly mention that the tense of the infinitive in the indirect statement indicates a specific time relationship to the main verb, that is the head verb that introduces the indirect statement. There are 3 tenses of infinitives in Latin: the present, the perfect, and the future. The present tense infinitive will denote an action that goes on at the same time as the main verb. In this video, we will just be focusing on present tense infinitives in indirect statements. The perfect tense infinitive, as we will see in another lesson, denotes an action earlier than the main verb, and a future tense infinitive denotes an action that goes on later than the main verb. And so, in our example, our infinitive is esse, which is a present infinitive. So, we saw in the image that Scaevola was being brave, and at that same moment, the soldiers believed that he was brave. Okay, let's look at a few examples to get this idea of the indirect statement into our heads. Videt te manera. Short and sweet. Videt is the main verb, and he, or she, or it is going to be the subject. Te is the accusative subject of the indirect statement, and manera is the infinitive. And so we'll translate, he sees, videt, that key indirect statement introductory word in English, you remain. Okay, our second example. Gaudent nos venire. Main verb is gaudent. Our subject is they from the nt ending. Nos is the accusative subject of the indirect statement, and venire is the infinitive. Again, we have all 3 elements of the indirect statement. We have a head verb, gaudent, we have an accusative subject, nos, and we have an infinitive verb, venire. And so we can translate, they rejoice, gaudent, that, there's your key indirect statement introductory word in English, we are coming, nos, venire. Since we have a present tense infinitive, venire, we are coming, and at the same time, they rejoice. Okay, another example. Credidimus eos pugnare. Our main verb is credidimus, and the subject of that is going to be we, as we know from the mus ending. Eos is going to be the accusative subject of the indirect statement, and pugnare is the present infinitive. Again, we have all 3 elements of the indirect statement. We have a verb of the head, or perception, believing, credidimus. We have an accusative subject, eos, and we have an infinitive, pugnare. And so we can translate this, we believed, credidimus, that they were fighting. Again, we have the key English word, that, in our translation. And pugnare is a present infinitive, and so it is going on at the same time as the main verb. Since we believed is a perfect tense verb in past time, then eos pugdara is going to be at the same point on the timeline. We believed in the past that they were fighting, also in the past. And one more example. Caesar scripsit, se gallos vincere. Scripsit is the main verb, Caesar is the nominative subject, vincere is the infinitive. Now we have two accusative words here, se and gallos. Remember that se, the reflexive pronoun, always refers back to the subject of the main verb. So in this case, Caesar. Now, you can see that there is some room for ambiguity here with two accusatives. One is going to be the subject, one is going to be the object. So either we have Caesar conquering the Gauls, or the Gauls conquering Caesar. We're going to be optimistic for Caesar and say that Caesar is going to conquer the Gauls. But, as often happens with reading Latin, you'll need to use the context to determine what is being said. So, we translate, Caesar wrote, scripsit, that he was conquering the Gauls. Again, we have that keyword that in English. Our infinitive in Latin, vincere, is a present tense infinitive. And so the action of the indirect statement is going to go on at the same time as the main verb, scripsit. Caesar wrote that he was conquering at the time that he was writing. And we will finish with a quotation from Latin literature. This is from Catullus, a poet who was very proud of writing with wit and charm. So he says in poem 12, Hoc salsum esse putas. The main verb of his question is putas. Do you think? Salsum is an adjective in the accusative case, referring back to hoc, which is the accusative subject of the indirect statement. And esse is our present tense infinitive. So, do you think that, indirect statement word, that, this thing is witty? Yes, we do, Catullus. Yes, we do.